Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney on the Lane Gnosis website truebluehealer.com, where in just 20 minutes you can get physical evidence of your divine spark being activated, and that will lead to vivid messaging dreams and ultimately an internal mentoring voice, and you will have all kinds of wonderful adventures finding out what you really are. Your dimensions are far greater than your physical body. You can discover this way. I know you're not listening, so I'll talk about what interests you more, but this is actually more important. But most people have a perverse set of values these days, thanks to the way society's being run. Can I just bring to your attention, one of the most gripping guerrilla wars ever fought were the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka, who wanted their own independent state inside that island, and fought a war that, from a military point of view, was admirable in terms of sheer out-to-win warfare at any cost. It included suicide bombing, not for religious reasons at all, but for simply geopolitical. We want our own independent state in Sri Lanka. And they were highly organised and highly intelligent, the way they went about making war to get what they wanted. And that was, they ran businesses, international shipping businesses, just to make money to buy more weapons, which were, interestingly enough, supplied from Israel. Funny, they're always in the background. Maybe the war was sustained by Israel, I'm not sure, but these people are all considered to be goyim. I don't know the full detail of that. But one outstanding thing the Tamil Tigers did was, you probably do remember this, they went to tremendous effort to assassinate the enemy government. The Sri Lankan government was under personal attack. Government ministers were killed by suicide bombers, top public servants, and it went on for decades, you see. And to me, this indicates a very intelligent, highly focused effort to win at any cost, to win a geopolitical conflict and carve out their own state. Ultimately, they lost. They didn't win that war, but it was an outstanding example of sheer guts, determination, and intelligent application of force. Okay? Now, I'm not admiring what they did for a minute. Okay? But I think you would have to ask, as an informed viewer, I'm sure you are, why isn't that happening in Europe? Why do we get all these silly teenage jihadis who have got emotional problems and been divorced by somebody and start shooting people up, blowing up garbage cans and shooting up nurseries and kindergartens and things like that? Why aren't they attacking the French power pyramid? Why aren't they assassinating ministers in Europe? Why is not one German politician being shot at, being blown up? Why do we only have teenage incompetents doing all this stuff? You've really got to ask the question, do they really want to achieve any successful goal against Europe? It would seem an easy thing to do with Google today enabling the whereabouts of people to be tracked fairly easily, and you can simply physically follow them. If they had the determination of the Tamil Tigers, there would be vast amounts of government casualties, and people would be scared to be meeting in a room, that sort of thing. They'd be scared to be in the same room together because they are a target making you a target. So it seems you could paralyse entire governments in Europe just by continually assassinating their politicians. But we notice they don't. These mentally incompetent jihadis target the most innocent people who have got no say whatsoever in international politics. They're just average, nice people who would probably like to have a say in international politics, but they don't. They're just too tiny. They are pedestrian street people. So they are targeted by these under-functioning, incompetent jihadis. It's got so blatant now that the Daesh magazine comes out, or ISIS magazine. It comes out every month and it tells a few isolated lone wolf jihadis and maybe a couple of people who are sort of not completely stupid, to do something so it looks like ISIS is predicting things and in control of things. Yet in fact all of the attacks are flea bites on an elephant. There's no way in the world, because you blow up a few garbage cans, blow up a couple of McDonald's or something, chop up a couple of priests in a church somewhere, that 80 million Frenchmen are going to surrender to a bunch of incompetent schoolboys who keep blowing up garbage cans. That's never going to happen. So you've really got to ask the question, what is the point of the terrorism? It just seems to be more Operation Gladio that the NATO states were doing since the 1950s to stop Italy going communist and other geopolitical goals. The killing of innocents seems to be what makes people cling to their conservative government that they have. And indeed, France is now building another paramilitary force, which is all badges and uniforms, and they're just going to pirate the staff out of existing police and military forces. So there'll be no net improvement, just a new uniform on the streets of France. And of course, civil liberties will likely be further eroded. So it looks to me like it's fake terrorism all the way. And that seems to have, knowledge of this background makes there's an army of people on YouTube today who look at every alleged terrorist attack and rip it to pieces, pull it to pieces, and do show you some alarming anomalies. And you start to question everything they tell you. I mean, the basic thing you would like to see, if it were a genuine attack, that all the video footage and the still photographs would add up like a perfect jigsaw puzzle to justify the finalised account in the media. Right? You'd expect to see that occasionally, wouldn't you? Even by accident. They got everything right, they reported everything correctly, the police said everything right, they didn't flood any of their speeches, and that sort of thing. And so it never happens. It just never happens. There's never a terrorist attack where there isn't some strange doubts about where people come from. And you can see it in video analysis of columns and news pages, that sort of thing, and the funny, grainy photographs taken by 20-year-old telephone cameras at the very scene of these alleged massacres. We also noticed that ISIS is actually an English name coined by English-speaking people, specifically President Netanyahu of Israel, who gave it that name to talk about it in his paperwork corresponding with the CIA. It stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. That's nothing new, I'm telling you. ISIL means the same thing with Levant, which is the Saudi Arabian peninsula. So now it's still noted, despite the fact that ISIS is supposedly motivated by Wahhabism, the most extreme form of Islam, and knowing full well that the Quran is far more anti-Semitic than Hitler's Mein Kampf ever was, it's noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed, that ISIS never kills Jewish people. Isn't that strange? It just doesn't happen. Why isn't there a massacre of Jews anywhere? Mysteriously, Netanyahu has said, we have no fear of ISIS whatsoever. We're okay with ISIS. And in fact, ISIS fighters are put back together in Turkish and Israeli hospitals. So very clearly, the whole ISIS thing in the middle of the Daesh thing is really all working for Israel to balkanise the Middle East. It's an international geopolitical plan involving the major Western powers, France, Britain, America, etc. So it's obviously all fake terrorism, though it seems to be quite genuine in the Middle East. You've really got to ask the question, why aren't French politicians being blown up by a very determined enemy, a truly determined enemy that really believes what they preach? Yet they are curiously disciplined as to always looking away from Jewish people, from Israeli politicians, that sort of thing. Why don't they attack German politicians? Why haven't they attacked Angela Merkel? It's kind of strange, isn't it, that the best they can muster are mentally deficient young men, teenagers who have got half-formed brains, who don't know which way is up and keep running a Facebook page on terrorism up to the day they're shot. Isn't that kind of strange? No one thinks of going submerged, getting off Facebook and not using a mobile phone. It's all very odd, isn't it? What greatly mitigates the impact of all these teenage jihadi terrorists is that they seem to be seriously mentally under-functional in the sense that we've got some young men in their 20s in 30 years jail sentences in our Supermax prison because they were plotting to blow up the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you see, and they were actually buying ammonium nitrate and diesel fuel and that stuff and a few chemicals. And they seriously believed that you could blow up the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is made of 6-foot thick steel girders and massive concrete substructure. They thought you could blow it up with just like a utility full of ammonium nitrate and diesel. And the naivety is astonishing that they thought they could do that. And for many, many months, they talked between Sydney and Melbourne on long-distance phone calls, which were all taped by the police. And the police just tendered as evidence that they were plotting all this. Hundreds of hours of phone calls of them obviously plotting to blow up Australian infrastructure. So they really didn't have a case. They had no defence. These were two groups of panel beaters from, I believe, Lebanon. And so they're safely locked away now forever, basically. And commendably, Australia is just bringing in indefinite detention for convicted jihadis to treat them like pedophiles whose brains are wired differently. They're unteachable people. Pedophiles can't be reformed. Rolf Harris is a good example of that. He's writing songs for when he gets out. He's got not the slightest interest that he could be wrong. He's broken society's rules, right? So he's a good example of that. It's in the paper this morning. But indefinite detention of jihadis is a good example of what should be done with any person convicted of terrorism in Europe. Now, why hasn't the great French intelligentsia figured that out? Why haven't they figured it out? It's kind of strange, isn't it? Where are their brains? Are they permanently out to lunch? I really don't know. But ankle braceleting people and then letting them off awaiting sentencing so they can go and behead a priest. Surely this must wake up the French intelligentsia. They're obviously not intelligentsia, the people who think they are. I suppose it's all been written up by newspaper columnists. The new government policy. Goodness gracious, the mind boggles. But we're actually saved by the stupidity of a lot of these terrorists. They just don't have the brains. Why don't they ever blow up political goals, political people, blow up courts and judges and police stations? They just don't do it. Kind of strange, isn't it, that all they can do is shoot up little old ladies and 85-year-old priests and that sort of thing. It shows their essential cowardly nature. It really says something about them. The war on terror is still seemingly absolutely fraudulent as far as I can tell. And the army of truth seekers that just keep pulling apart every attack and saying, let's look at the video, let's wait for a few days, let them finalise the narrative, and then we'll see, do the pictures, do the movies, do the still shots, do all the police statements add up. It never does. It's just strange, isn't it? It's just so strange. More famous terrorists would probably have been the IRA terrorists who seem unable to plan things and figure out what's going to happen next is a very simple way to figure out the scenario you want to get to the future that you're after. So you blow up a supermarket and you say, well, what happens next? Not much. You just fix the supermarket, don't you? It's been suggested that British intelligence played a role in some of the bombings of the 1960s to try and inflame the IRA to greater criminality, greater guerrilla warfare. But I think it was about 1970-something, someone got the IRA leaders in a classroom and with a whiteboard and showed them that for every bomb that went off, there was an extra 10,000 occupying British soldiers added to Northern Ireland. And the lesson was that the more you bomb your own country, the more of the hated British occupiers you will have. Because previous to all that, there are very little presence of British influence in Northern Ireland. They were pretty much left to their own devices. But as a result of all the bombing, there was almost a British soldier in every street corner with a machine gun, you see. So it was pointed out to them that you've been a total failure, that bombing, street bombings and car bombings and blowing up supermarkets and all that, and massacres and all that sort of stuff, doesn't actually deliver the political objectives that you want. So they actually stopped their military program as a result of this 2-hour lecture from some academic, revealing how stupid they all truly were because they didn't have any plan for the future. And they ultimately got some political power, but they couldn't stop playing James Bond spy games, and they were greatly discredited even when they were given political power because they were tapping other people's phones and all sorts of things in Parliament, you see. So they're basically sort of natural militants, natural delinquents, basically, that's all. I mean, the greatest thing they ever tried, they killed Louis Mountbatten, who's the uncle of Prince Charles. That didn't change England's course at all in any of its foreign policies. And the final great hurrah, which didn't work, they made some homemade mortars on the back of a truck. I think their intention was to blow up Buckingham Palace and hope to kill half the royal family. It didn't happen. But even if they had succeeded and they levelled Buckingham Palace and killed half the royal family, do a handful of Irish men drinking in a pub in Ireland really believe that the British people would then surrender? Please put down your pint of Guinness and come and govern us. We'll make you our King of England because you're such a frightening adversary. It's utterly pointless. It doesn't make sense. It's a fantasy of the most extreme thing. It's utterly impossible to happen. And that's the problem with so many of these terrorists around the world. They're really just professional delinquents at best. They're teenagers who never grow up. And that's all we seem to see in Europe today. Teenagers who aren't ever going to grow up. Their brains aren't forming properly. They're never going to make it. So they take the easy way out. Islam promises forgiveness for all your sins. If you feel lousy about yourself, if you have a very low value of self-worth because you're into drugs, you can't find girls or something like that, and you feel terrible about yourself, you might be gay or something, well, there's a way to have all your sins forgiven. You can blow yourself up in a pointless explosion and call it a religious event. It's written in the Quran. It must be true, right? So their most outstanding feature is their gullibility. They'll believe anything they read, anything they are told, which is really a very childish character trait. And that's really all Europe's got to deal with, I think.